It all started on a warm spring morning when I received the first letter from the HOA. At first glance, it seemed like a typical notice, a fine for what they claimed was an unauthorized modification to my front yard. The so-called modification. A small garden patch of roses my late wife had planted years ago. Those roses weren't just flowers, they were memories, a piece of her I could hold onto after she passed. The president of the HOA, a man named Richard Collins, was infamous in our neighborhood. He wore expensive suits, drove a polished Mercedes, and carried himself like a king who owned every inch of land in the subdivision. People feared him, whispered about him, and did their best to avoid conflict. He thrived on intimidation, handing out fines like candy and threatening foreclosure on anyone who dared stand up to him. At first, I ignored the letter. Surely this was a mistake, I thought. But a week later, another one arrived. This time, the fee had doubled, and the language was harsher. The letter threatened legal action if I did not remove the roses immediately and pay the accumulated fines. I called the HOA office, only to be told coldly, "Mr. Collins says rules are rules. Remove them or face consequences." That night, I walked into my backyard, sat under the stars, and thought about my wife. Those roses were her pride. She'd kneel in the dirt every spring, humming as she tended to them. They were more than plants, they were her legacy. And I knew, right then, that I wouldn't give in. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. Collins began issuing citations for nonsense: garage door left open too long, mailbox not repainted in time, trash bins slightly out of place. Neighbors whispered apologies when they saw me, telling me they'd faced the same treatment but had caved out of fear. Collins had built a small empire of silence through intimidation. But I was different. What Collins didn't know was that I had a background in law. In fact, I was serving as a federal judge, something I kept private in my personal life. I had seen men like Collins before. Bullies who thrived on fear, who thought power meant control. And I knew one thing: every bully eventually meets someone they can't push around. I started quietly documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every voicemail, and every interaction. My training had taught me to build a case meticulously, piece by piece. I didn't let on to Collins that I was collecting evidence. Instead, I acted calm, even when he smirked at me in public meetings, even when he sent notices taped to my front door as though branding me the neighborhood's outcast. What Collins didn't know was that his arrogance was his greatest weakness. And I was going to use it against him. The final straw came on a Friday afternoon. I arrived home to find a bold red notice taped to my front door. It read: Final warning. Failure to comply with HOA demands will result in the initiation of foreclosure proceedings against your property. You will lose your home. I stood there, holding that paper in my hands, my pulse racing. My home, the place where my wife and I had built our life together, where memories echoed in every corner, was being threatened over roses and petty citations. I could almost hear my wife's voice telling me not to let them win. That weekend, Collins called a neighborhood meeting. He loved putting on a show, loved humiliating those he targeted in front of everyone else. I decided to attend. As I entered the clubhouse, all eyes turned toward me. Collins stood at the front, smug as ever, his arms crossed like a man certain of victory. He began the meeting with his usual theatrics, listing off supposed violations in the community. Then he turned to me. "Mr. Johnson," he said loudly, "your repeated disregard for community rules has left us no choice but to pursue foreclosure. You've brought this on yourself." I felt the room grow tense. Neighbors avoided my eyes, too afraid to speak out. Collins grinned, believing he had me cornered. That was when I decided it was time to show my hand. I stood slowly, holding the thick folder I had prepared over weeks of quiet work. Inside were the notices, the letters, the audio recordings, the bylaws of the HOA, and more importantly, the evidence of Collins's abuse of power. He had been fining people illegally, mismanaging funds, and violating state HOA regulations left and right. "Richard," I said calmly, locking eyes with him, "you've made a mistake. You think you're untouchable, that no one can hold you accountable. But you're wrong." He laughed, brushing me off. "And what are you going to do? Hire a lawyer? You'll lose. I own this board." That was when I revealed the truth. I don't need to hire anyone, I said, pulling out my federal credentials. I am Judge Samuel Johnson. And what you've been doing isn't just harassment, it's illegal. I have the evidence, and I will ensure this entire board is investigated under federal law. The room fell silent. Neighbors' eyes widened. Collins's smug smile faded into a pale mask of shock. He froze, staring at the badge in my hand, his world crumbling in an instant. For the first time, the bully had no words. And for the first time, the neighborhood realized they didn't have to be afraid anymore.